move to Finance and Performance Committee, performance reporting for April 2018, and I'll hand over to Andrew, as he was the chair of the report, but just to note that we're not dealing with the entire report, we're just dealing with the items that the committee wanted reported to this meeting prior to the conclusion of the financial year. Andrew.
Yeah, so the whole report, as has been said, will come through with the minutes of the meeting in the normal way, but there were a number of things that came up in the discussion about the report, which we felt were appropriate to have reported to this meeting, given that this is the last council meeting prior to consideration of the LTP, and we were certainly keen to pick up any things that that could inform that discussion, or that we might want to do work on before we locked the final LTP down. So the registered food premises once a year, there have been some changes to the regulatory environment that mean that we needed to consider changing that target for that level of service, but that brought about a discussion about what happens when there is a change in the environment, a change in the regulatory environment, or when something happens. And the current challenges that we've got around chlorination of the water supply would be a good example of that, the Havelock North inquiry. What do we then do to trigger a change to our level of service to reflect that change in the regulatory environment, or when something has happened which potentially changes the way we would look at a particular level of service? So that's what gave rise to item 3 in front of us today. Agrees that where there's a change to the environment, for example, an event, incident, or change to regulatory requirements, in order to maintain fit for purpose levels of service plans will be immediately reviewed by staff, and proposed changes to level of service will be referred to the next meeting of the Finance and Performance Committee for recommendation to the Council. So that means that there's where there is that change, it immediately triggers that review by staff, and it immediately then triggers the matter being brought to the next meeting of Finance and Performance, so that we can consider, on recommendation from staff who've considered this, whether any change to the level of service is required, and so that we can get that change to the level of service in place as soon as possible to reflect that new environment. The additional staff recommendations, additional information regarding the proposed changes to level of service in relation to the general service satisfaction and point of contact surveys. Obviously, the surveys have been reported. They're available on our website. We were very keen to make sure that the results of those surveys obviously generate work which addresses some of the issues that have come up, and we've got the additional appendices to the report today, which deal with some of those issues and work streams which will be underway in order for that to happen. And of course, Carleen has got some work underway within the organisation, and particularly with the ELT, to make sure that there are some work programmes particularly designed to address some of the issues that the point of contact survey and the resident satisfaction survey have brought about. And of course, we've also indicated in relation to the EAG report that we will be continuing to review levels of service on an ongoing basis, probably through the committees, after the LTP has been decided. And of course, the resident satisfaction survey, point of contact survey, and what we've heard through the LTP submissions process will all come into play in any consideration that we have of whether the current levels of service reflect the concerns of our residents. This obviously relates to that area as well. And in fact, point 5 in these recommendations notes that the ELT will be doing some work there. And obviously picks up the surveys and the LTP feedback. And then there's additional information provided, again, as a further appendix to today's report, just looking at the levels of service as they relate to those areas that came up as concerns in the surveys that I've been talking about. So there are a couple of additional appendices which relate to the particular matters that we'd requested be brought to this meeting from Finance and Performance outside of the normal reporting cycle, just in case there was anything that we wanted to pick up to inform the LTP, or work that we're saying won't necessarily be reflected in the LTP but will be done between now and the annual plan next year, or any updated LTP next year.
Thank you. I'll just pass over to the Chief Executive and invite her to make some comments.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate some of the things that the Deputy Mayor has said. The issues around levels of service, we have hundreds of levels of service. We have both levels of service related to LTP and what we call non-LTP levels of service, which are really around management, accountability, levels of service. You've seen a lot of these previously, so in the development of the long-term plan and the service plans, there's been earlier discussions around those. And also workshops around specific areas in recent times around, roads and transport and three waters. So we've had some look at those in preparation for the LTP, but it does need to be a rolling process over the next 3 years, so that we continue to look at these in more depth. And rather than at one point every 3 years, given that they're so important. I think the issue about levels of service, though, is they're quite complex, and they're often a proxy for what it is that people are actually looking for. So resident satisfaction depends on a whole range of things. It depends on your level of investment in particular areas. It depends on progress or changes. It depends on our response to complaints and concerns that people have. And just their experience of things. So it might be the experience of a service, but it might be the experience of, driving down the road every day. And roads are a good example. So one of our lowest satisfaction, even pre-earthquakes, was to do with the smoothness of roads. What people need to see post-earthquake is actually progress around things. And I think I mentioned previously, it seems now that residents have been, in the past, could see the big stuff that's going on. Now they're worried about the potholes outside of their house every time they drive out of their driveway. So it's become a much more personalised issue. So the levels of service, I think, are really important, but there are other things that we need to do, and that's why we've linked the response and the work around the resident survey and the other information that we have from the submissions and the hearings to looking at what's a program of work that we need to understand. If we think about the resident survey, a proportion of it was around how council makes decisions and the information around that, so people understand how they can participate, how they can influence decisions and what those decisions are, as well as specific areas such as roads and our three waters and appearance of some of our parks and waterways. So that we need to do better in terms of people's experience and their understanding of what happens. So some of the work we'll look at excuse me, how we provide you with better information to support your decision making, how we allow people to really understand that. So reports not being so technical, but actually being more accessible and understandable for people, and engaging people earlier before decisions are made. And thinking about being much more citizen-centric in the way we deliver services, but also in the way that we communicate things. So there's quite a big piece of work that needs to happen around that, but certainly I think that the hearings, the submissions and the things like the various resident surveys we do quite a few surveys, will all input into that process. And we'll continue to feedback, probably initially through finance and performance.
Excellent. Right, any questions? Yanni?
Yeah, I'm just, in terms of the residents survey and the, the very damning targets and the actuals around the percentage of residents feeling that they have some influence, and understanding how we make decisions and feeling like they can participate, it would seem to me that there's some governance level decisions that we need to make. So it's not just a matter for the Chief Executive.
Absolutely.
So I just wondered, what's the best way of getting that addressed? I mean, I'm just really concerned that these targets are not being met, quite significantly lower than target, and there's a number of practices that we have that are not helping.
Yeah, no, look, I agree, and
So-
I'm not interrupting you, but as I've explained to councillors before, some of the structures that we have in place around decision making are clearly not working as well as they could, and I've already, for example, suggested that we shift to a capital program monitoring committee that has full responsibility for the entire capital program.
I guess I was more interested in the sort of short term things, like we're currently consulting on things like master road plans or where, you know, different transport projects, and I'm just really concerned that we're still not applying anything different to those.
Look, I think I'd rather wait for the analysis to come through from staff, because, you know, I think that you can look at some of the results and, you know, through one particular lens, but actually if you put a slightly different lens on it and you ask yourself the question, do I as a resident of the city understand why, if I ask for something to be done or the council asks for something to be consulted on, and I put in a submission and the result isn't what I put in, do I feel like I've been able to influence? So there's more than one issue, and there's more than one type of consultation and engagement. One of the things that you have raised on many occasions, Yanni, is the need to move to hearings panels and having report backs from hearings panel for decision making, or even having hearings panels delegated decision making. And I think that sort of approach is actually worth really lifting to another level.
Things like, you know, we just had the Wolston drop-in sessions, for example, but I don't know that all the councillors are invited to hear. So the councillors are making decisions, but sometimes we're not given copies of the submissions. We're not invited to the meetings where people.
Well, actually, no, we are given copies of the submissions. I think that we need to have a proper discussion around the framework for the type of decision. And you've raised this on many occasions, and, you know, I think I would like you to be happy that you have finally been heard by me, certainly, and I believe that we need to actually make some decisions about where delegations could properly enable, for example, a community board in conjunction with maybe some councillors or representatives to make decisions.
Can I just suggest that what we do, so we'll be putting some work together to understand a range of things. Some of that will be around governance and decision making and how we can support that. And then I think it's worthwhile having a bit of a workshop to get your feedback into that. And can I and just suggest that we just complete the LTP for that bit, and then we can focus on that.
And so, I just want to completely support what the Chief Executive just said, because we've got to focus on the LTP, which is why this report is here now, and the next step is to make sure that we build a proper governance framework that will support the organisation.
Right, okay, so concerns that we've previously identified, we feed into the Chief Executive, so that things like, you know, there was a really good letter that you said about the cycleways, which had a number of actually key learnings, which hasn't been implemented.
Yeah, well, if you can do that, and then we can incorporate that, but I think it's a chance for everybody to have a discussion about how you feel that works.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
I don't know if it's possible for the community board maybe to get briefed on the odour complaints, or whether that the ITI committee will pick that up. It was really good to have that information, and I don't want to take time today drilling into the specifics of that, but it did seem that it does raise some questions around where the complaints are coming from and what's being done.
Would you like that in the first instance to be with the chairs, and then individual committees can call the team in if they need to?
Well, I wonder if it's maybe better going through the local community boards as well, so that the projects
but there's every community board.
Yes, but for the community board areas, like where there's a number of complaints, like Central.
Every community board has a number of complaints.
No, I know, but the specific projects that are being done to address the complaints in those areas, I just think that would be useful.
Yep. Can we can we, where's the odour one?
Okay, so yes, why don't we start with circulating the information, and then we can think about what processes for getting more detailed information, but perhaps the community boards.
It refers to 10 projects happening in the first 3 years of the LTP,
Right.
but it doesn't refer to what those projects are.
Okay,
Well, we can get that information.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I just wanted to make a general comment.
Yeah, well, I'll get a mover and a seconder first. So, Andrew, you'd like to move that? Seconded by Anne Galloway. So I'll open that up for discussion. Andrew?
Thank you. Just a couple of further comments on the resident satisfaction survey and point of contact surveys. Clearly, you know, we've heard from residents through these two surveys, and we've also heard from residents on a wide range of issues through the LTP engagement and submissions process as well. And it's been really interesting sitting here listening to residents and their concerns and seeing, you know, patterns of concern, and particularly from particular areas of the city, and to line those up with what we've heard through the surveys, which have been reported in quite a timely way, so that we can consider them at the same time as we're considering those LTP submissions. But I think the key message here this morning is that we're really gearing up to respond to the results of these surveys and what we've heard through the LTP submissions. And obviously the analysis of the survey results will be important in that regard. Our first opportunity to respond will be in the decision-making meetings for the LTP that start next Friday, but also through the work that we're doing reviewing those service plans systematically over the next period, and obviously that could well result in some changes to levels of service to better reflect the concerns and the aspirations of our residents and our communities. So I think it's absolutely clear that as elected members, and I refer to the comments made by the Chief Executive this morning as well, that we're taking this as an absolute priority. And I also agree with my colleague Councillor Johansson that looking at governance and decision-making processes is going to be a key part of what we need to look at over the next period, and I absolutely look forward to looking at that to see how, again, we can better reflect the expectations of our community in the way that we do things.
Yanni?
Thank you. Just to make several points. One is that we also had a quite expensive communications review that cost $80,000. There are a number of recommendations in there which I think would be timely to revisit, because I think what's really important is that we develop two-way
Sorry, what was the date of that? I don't mean to interrupt.
That was, I think, 2013.
It predates everyone.
Oh, predates everyone
But it
here.
was approved.
Okay.
Like it was
No, I
approved.
just wanted to make sure you were
And
talking about that report.
It doesn't predate everyone.
Yep.
So some of us were here, not just me. But actually there was a number of things that actually, you know, in terms of building relationships with people, regular meetings with two-way communication between us and others was quite valuable, I thought. But also, you know, I welcome the opportunity to look at how we make decisions. And as has been said, you know, I have been concerned that we've gone away from giving people having hearings where people can work through the issues to quite a formal structure. I think we can't divorce the delegations issue, because when things get delegated to either a committee and there's no local representation, or people don't feel that they're locally elected people can actually make a decision on something, then that does create an issue. So looking at the community board delegations, I think we need to get on and do that. You know, that's been outstanding for a long time now, and the sooner we get the clarity around that, then I think we can really improve how we do some of those governance things. There is a disconnect at the moment between things that come as part of community board recommendations to council for decisions and the information around that. So I think that's really important to review. There was a very good letter in 2016 regarding the Rapanui Shagrop Cycleway with a number of learnings, and I think, you know, it may be timely to go back and reflect on that, because actually it would seem to me that there was a number of really sensible things in there, but still I'm not seeing those be consistently applied through what we're doing. And I think, you know, let's learn from what's happened previously so we don't repeat those mistakes. I did want to acknowledge the success of QE2 reopening, and one of the performance measures that we were failing was people going to our rec and sports centres. Hopefully that one, I think, is no longer going to fail given the popularity. And the only other point I wish to make was I think it's really interesting looking at the water reticulation and the huge issue with water breaks along our water mains. And so I think we really do need to really think about that in terms of the LTP, in terms of the skirt legacy. What we can see quite clearly from this report is the huge impact that that's having, and that is very real in terms of risk. And you know, we will obviously rightfully focus on the chlorination issue, but we also have a major issue with our water main reticulation system in the city that does need to be addressed, which this report is highlighting. But thank you for providing the information and the ODA advice. I think that's really useful. There's a number of improvements there that staff have recognised, and I think at a governance level it would be good to have an ability to endorse those at some stage.
All right, I shall put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried.